The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Afghan village of Kandahar province as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted her tactical vest for what she thought would be a routine intelligence-gathering mission. The 28-year-old Navy intelligence officer had been deployed for 8 months, working closely with SEAL Team 6 on counterterrorism operations that had saved countless lives. Her expertise in Arabic dialects and cultural intelligence had made her an invaluable asset to the team, earning respect from even the most hardened special operations veterans. Sarah had grown up in small-town Nebraska, where her father taught her to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her mother, a linguistics professor, had filled their home with books about different cultures and languages. This unique combination of tactical awareness and intellectual curiosity had shaped Sarah into exactly the kind of officer the Navy needed for complex overseas operations. She had volunteered for this deployment despite having the option to remain stateside, driven by a deep sense of duty and the knowledge that her skills could genuinely make a difference in the field. The intelligence briefing that morning had seemed straightforward enough. Local sources had reported suspicious activity in a compound approximately 15 kilometers northeast of their forward operating base. The area had been quiet for weeks, which itself was cause for concern in a region where silence often preceded violence. Sarah's role was to accompany a small reconnaissance team, provide real-time translation services, and assess whether the intelligence warranted a larger operation. Team Leader Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez had handpicked the team for this mission. Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran with 3 combat deployments under his belt, had specifically requested Sarah for her ability to read situations that others might miss. The team included Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, a communications specialist known for his steady nerves under pressure, and Petty Officer Mike Chun, a medic whose quick thinking had saved numerous lives during previous operations. The 4-person team represented a perfect blend of experience, specialization, and trust that had been forged through months of successful missions together. As they prepared their equipment in the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah couldn't shake a subtle feeling of unease. Her instincts, honed through countless operations, were telling her something felt different about this mission. The intelligence had come through channels that were usually reliable, but there had been an urgency to the briefing that seemed disproportionate to the reported threat level. Rodriguez had noticed her concern and pulled her aside to ask if she wanted to sit this one out. Sarah had declined, knowing that her linguistic skills might prove crucial if they encountered local civilians who could provide additional intelligence. The helicopter ride to the drop zone passed without incident, the landscape below revealing the stark beauty of Afghanistan's rugged terrain. Sarah reviewed her notes one final time, studying the compound layout and memorizing key phrases in the local dialect that might prove useful during the mission. The pilot, a seasoned aviator named Captain Lisa Wong, had flown Sarah's team on numerous occasions and provided updates on weather conditions and potential extraction points as they approached their destination. They landed in a dried riverbed approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound, using the natural terrain to mask their arrival. The team moved with practiced efficiency, each member knowing their role without need for verbal communication. Sarah carried her standard-issue M4 carbine along with specialized communication equipment that would allow her to maintain contact with both the team and their base of operations. Her pack also contained cultural items and local currency that could prove valuable if they needed to interact with civilians during their reconnaissance. The approach to the compound took nearly an hour, with the team moving carefully through terrain that offered little natural cover. Sarah used this time to observe the surrounding area, noting details that might not appear significant to others, but could provide crucial context for understanding local dynamics. She spotted laundry hanging outside several distant homes, indicating normal daily life, and observed the condition of local roads, which showed recent heavy vehicle traffic that didn't match typical patterns for the area. As they reached their observation point overlooking the compound, Rodriguez established communications with their base, while Sullivan set up surveillance equipment. Sarah focused her attention on the target building, a 2-story stone structure that appeared abandoned from the outside, but showed subtle signs of recent occupation. Chun monitored their rear approach, ensuring they hadn't been followed and that their extraction route remained clear. The compound itself was larger than the briefing had indicated, with several outbuildings and what appeared to be an underground storage area. Sarah's translation skills proved immediately valuable when they intercepted radio communications originating from within the compound. The conversations she overheard were not in the expected local dialect, but rather in a mixture of Arabic and Farsi that suggested the presence of foreign fighters. More concerning, the communications referenced a timeline that indicated whatever operation was being planned was imminent, possibly within the next 24 hours. This intelligence dramatically changed the significance of their mission from routine reconnaissance to potentially preventing a major attack. Rodriguez made the decision to move closer to the compound to gather additional intelligence before calling for backup. This decision, while tactically sound based on the information they had, would prove to be the moment their mission began to unravel. As the team moved to a secondary observation point, Sarah noticed movement in one of the compound's windows that suggested they might have been spotted. She immediately signaled Rodriguez, who ordered the team to freeze in place while he assessed the situation. The next few minutes passed in tense silence as the team waited to determine whether their position had been compromised. Sarah continued monitoring radio communications, which had suddenly become much more animated and appeared to include references to American forces in the area. Sullivan reported unusual electronic activity that suggested the compound's occupants were attempting to jam their communications equipment. Chen identified multiple possible escape routes while maintaining watch for any movement that might indicate an approaching threat. It was Sullivan who first spotted the movement in the hills above their position. A glint of sunlight off metal, barely visible among the rocks, indicated the presence of at least one sniper. Rodriguez immediately ordered the team to take cover, but their current position offered limited protection against elevated threats. Sarah realized they were caught in what appeared to be a carefully planned ambush, with their presence somehow anticipated despite the classified nature of their mission. The implications of this realization sent a chill down her spine as she understood they might be facing a trap that had been set specifically for them. The first shots came from multiple directions simultaneously, confirming Sarah's worst fears about their tactical situation. The team found themselves pinned down in terrain that offered minimal cover against attackers who clearly had predetermined firing positions and superior numbers. Rodriguez immediately called for extraction and backup, but the jamming equipment made communication difficult and uncertain. Sullivan worked frantically to establish a clear communication channel, while Chen began treating a grazing wound on Rodriguez's arm from the initial volley of gunfire. Sarah's training took over as she provided covering fire while analyzing their tactical options. Her mind raced through possible escape routes and defensive strategies, but their situation was deteriorating rapidly. The attackers demonstrated a level of coordination and equipment that suggested this was not a random encounter with local insurgents, but rather a sophisticated operation planned by experienced fighters. The realization that they had walked into what appeared to be a targeted ambush raised questions about how their mission details might have been compromised. As the firefight intensified, Rodriguez made the difficult decision to split the team in an attempt to create confusion among their attackers and increase their chances of survival. He ordered Sullivan and Chun to attempt a flanking maneuver while he and Sarah would try to reach higher ground that might offer better defensive positions and communication opportunities. This decision, born from desperate circumstances and limited options, would ultimately separate Sarah from her teammates at the most critical moment of the mission. The last thing Sarah saw of her teammates was Chun providing covering fire as Sullivan attempted to reach a rock formation that might offer protection and a better vantage point. Rodriguez had been moving toward what appeared to be a defensible position when additional gunfire erupted from a direction they hadn't anticipated. Sarah found herself alone, cut off from her team by hostile fire, with her communication equipment damaged and her ammunition running dangerously low. The compound that had been their target now seemed to be the source of coordinated attacks designed to eliminate her entire team. As darkness began to fall over the Afghan landscape, Sarah realized she was facing a survival situation unlike anything her training had prepared her for. The sound of gunfire had diminished, but she couldn't determine whether this meant her teammates had escaped, been captured, or worse. Her immediate priority became finding shelter and avoiding capture while attempting to establish communication with her base. She had no way of knowing that her teammates, believing her to have been killed in the ambush, were at that moment fighting their own battle for survival while planning a rescue mission that would test every skill they had learned as Navy SEALs. The compound below remained active with movement and lights, suggesting her presence in the area was still known to hostile forces who would likely begin a systematic search as soon as daylight returned. Sarah gathered her remaining equipment and began moving toward terrain that might offer better concealment, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether she lived to see another sunrise. Her survival would depend not only on her own training and determination, but also on the unbreakable bonds forged between military teammates who never leave anyone behind. As she settled into a small cave formation that offered, temporary Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez pressed his back against the cold stone wall of a destroyed building, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on his arm as he tried to process the disaster their mission had become. Beside him, Petty Officer Jake Sullivan worked frantically with their damaged communication equipment, while Petty Officer Mike Chin kept watch through a crack in the wall. The three men had managed to escape the ambush site, but the cost had been devastating. Sarah Mitchell was missing, presumed dead, and their extraction helicopter had been forced to abort the rescue attempt due to heavy ground fire. The official report would list Lieutenant Mitchell as killed in action, another casualty of the ongoing war in Afghanistan. But Rodriguez knew the truth was far more complicated. During the chaotic firefight, he had seen Sarah take cover behind a rocky outcrop approximately 200 meters from their position. When the shooting stopped and they had fought their way clear, there had been no trace of her except for blood on the rocks and her damaged helmet. The hostile forces had swept the area systematically, but Rodriguez's gut told him they hadn't found what they were looking for. Sullivan finally managed to establish a weak communication link with their forward operating base, delivering a report that would officially end Sarah's military career and begin her transformation into a ghost. Colonel James Parker, their commanding officer, listened grimly to Rodriguez's account of the ambush and made the tactical decision that would haunt him for years to come. With hostile forces controlling the area and intelligence suggesting a major attack was imminent, he could not authorize a search and rescue operation that might compromise additional personnel and missions. The helicopter that evacuated Rodriguez's team landed at Forward Operating Base Chapman as the sun set over the Afghan mountains. Medical personnel immediately began treating Rodriguez's wound while intelligence officers debriefed Sullivan and Chin about what they had observed during the mission. The three SEALs answered questions mechanically, providing the tactical details that would be included in official reports, but each man struggled with the knowledge that they had left a teammate behind. In the unforgiving world of special operations, this violation of their most sacred principle felt like a betrayal of everything they had sworn to uphold. Colonel Parker faced an impossible situation as he reviewed the intelligence gathered during the failed mission. Sarah's intercepted communications had revealed that a major terrorist attack was being planned, with a timeline that demanded immediate action. He had to choose between launching a large-scale operation to prevent potential mass casualties or organizing a search and rescue mission for one missing officer who was most likely already dead. The mathematics of war are cruel and unforgiving, weighing individual lives against strategic objectives and calculations that no training can adequately prepare officers to make. Meanwhile, 8 kilometers from where her teammates believed she had died, Sarah Mitchell was discovering exactly how much punishment the human body and spirit could endure. The explosion that had separated her from her team had left her with a concussion, several cracked ribs, and a deep gash on her left leg that required immediate medical attention. She had managed to find shelter in a shepherd's cave, using her basic medical training to treat her injuries with supplies from her emergency kit. The cave provided protection from both the elements and enemy patrols, but it also trapped her in a position where rescue would be nearly impossible. Sarah's survival training kicked in as she assessed her situation with brutal honesty. Her communication equipment had been destroyed in the blast, leaving her with no way to signal for help or coordinate with friendly forces. Her weapon was functional, but ammunition was limited, meaning she could defend herself only briefly if discovered. Most critically, her injuries limited her mobility to the point where evading capture would be extremely difficult if enemy forces mounted a systematic search of the area. She was alone, wounded, and presumed dead by the only people who might attempt a rescue. The first night in the cave passed slowly, with Sarah drifting in and out of consciousness while trying to monitor sounds that might indicate approaching threats. Her concussion made it difficult to think clearly, but she forced herself to develop a survival plan that might keep her alive long enough for an opportunity to escape. She rationed her water and the small amount of food in her emergency supplies, knowing that dehydration would become critical within days if she couldn't find an alternative source. The cave had provided shelter, but it might also become her tomb if she couldn't find a way to signal her location to friendly forces. Back at the forward operating base, Rodriguez found himself unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that came from combat and loss. He replayed the mission in his mind, analyzing every decision and wondering if different choices might have prevented the disaster. Sullivan and Chun were experiencing similar struggles, each man questioning whether they had done enough to locate Sarah during the firefight. The three SEALs had participated in dozens of successful missions, but this failure felt different because it violated the fundamental trust that existed between teammates in life-or-death situations. Colonel Parker called Rodriguez to his office the following morning to discuss the intelligence Sarah had gathered and its implications for future operations. The terrorist cell they had been tracking was indeed planning a major attack, and the timeline suggested it would occur within the next 72 hours. Parker had to make a decision about whether to act on incomplete intelligence or wait for additional confirmation that might come too late to prevent mass casualties. Rodriguez listened to the briefing while struggling with the knowledge that Sarah's sacrifice was providing the intelligence needed to save other lives. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Rodriguez asked permission to organize a search and rescue mission for Sarah. Parker's response was immediate and unambiguous. The area remained under hostile control, the terrorist threat required all available resources, and Sarah Mitchell was officially presumed dead. Any unauthorized mission would result in court-martial proceedings for every participant. Rodriguez understood the logic behind the decision, but it conflicted with everything he had been taught about leaving no one behind. That evening, Rodriguez met quietly with Sullivan and Chun in their shared quarters to discuss a conversation that would never appear in any official record. The three men talked about duty, loyalty, and the promises they had made to each other as members of an elite unit. They discussed the possibility that Sarah might still be alive and the likelihood that she would die if left alone much longer. They talked about orders, regulations, and the potential consequences of disobedience. Most importantly, they talked about what it meant to be a Navy SEAL and whether some principles were more important than career considerations. Sullivan was the first to voice what all three men were thinking. They had to go back for Sarah, regardless of orders or consequences. Chun immediately agreed, adding that their oath as SEALs superseded any temporary orders from commanders who hadn't been on the ground during the mission. Rodriguez, as team leader, felt the weight of responsibility for both Sarah's disappearance and his teammates' safety if they attempted an unauthorized rescue. But he also knew that living with the knowledge that they had abandoned a teammate would be worse than any punishment the military could impose. The plan they developed that night was simple, dangerous, and completely unauthorized. They would leave the base before dawn, using equipment they could acquire without raising suspicions, and return to the area where Sarah had disappeared. The mission would be conducted with minimal resources and no official support, meaning they would be entirely on their own if things went wrong. Rodriguez made it clear that participation was voluntary and that he would understand if either man chose to remain at base rather than risk their military career for what might prove to be a futile gesture. Neither Sullivan nor Chun hesitated in their commitment to the mission. They spent the remaining hours before dawn gathering equipment, studying satellite imagery of the area, and developing contingency plans for various scenarios they might encounter. Their preparation was necessarily limited by the need to avoid detection, but their experience working together allowed them to coordinate effectively with minimal communication. Each man understood his role and accepted the risks associated with operating without backup or extraction support. As the three SEALs prepared to leave their base in direct view, the weak voice that responded to Rodriguez's careful approach sent relief flooding through all three SEALs as they realized Sarah Mitchell was alive, conscious, and coherent enough to recognize their signals. Chun immediately moved to the cave entrance while Sullivan maintained watch for enemy activity that might have been attracted by their movement. Rodriguez slipped into the narrow cave opening and found Sarah propped against the back wall, her weapon trained on the entrance until she confirmed the identity of her rescuers. The reunion was emotional but brief, as all four operators understood they were deep in hostile territory with limited time before their position would be discovered. Chen's medical assessment revealed that Sarah's condition was serious but not immediately life-threatening. Her concussion had improved over the past 48 hours, but dehydration and infection in her leg wound required immediate treatment. More concerning was evidence of internal bleeding that suggested complications from her initial injuries. Chen began administering 4 fluids while treating the infected wound, knowing that Sarah would need proper medical facilities within hours to prevent her condition from becoming critical. The primitive conditions in the cave had kept her alive, but they had also prevented her from receiving the care her injuries required. As Chun worked to stabilize Sarah's condition, Rodriguez assessed their tactical situation and quickly realized they faced an almost impossible challenge. Sarah's injuries prevented her from moving at the pace necessary to evade enemy patrols. Their communication equipment remained largely non-functional, and they had no extraction plan that didn't require crossing several kilometers of hostile territory. Sullivan reported increasing radio chatter in the surrounding area, suggesting that enemy forces were aware of their presence and beginning to coordinate search efforts. The unauthorized rescue mission had found its target, but getting everyone home alive would require a miracle. Sarah briefed her teammates on the intelligence she had gathered during her isolation, information that dramatically increased the significance of their mission beyond simple rescue. She had overheard radio communications indicating that the terrorist attack was scheduled for the following morning, with targets including a school and marketplace in Kandahar City. The intelligence was specific enough to prevent the attack, but only if they could get the information to their command within hours. Sarah's survival had preserved crucial intelligence that could save hundreds of civilian lives, but her physical condition made immediate evacuation essential. Rodriguez made the difficult decision to attempt reaching their forward operating base despite the obvious risks involved. The alternative was to remain hidden and hope for rescue, but Sarah's medical condition and the intelligence she carried made waiting impossible. He sent Sullivan ahead to scout their route, while Chun continued treating Sarah's injuries and preparing her for movement. The plan was simple and desperate. Move as quickly as Sarah's condition allowed while avoiding enemy patrols that were actively searching the area for exactly their type of small unit movement. The first few hundred meters of their movement went smoothly, with Sullivan reporting clear routes and no immediate threats. Sarah was able to walk with assistance, though her pace was necessarily slow and her condition visibly deteriorated with physical exertion. Chun monitored her vital signs while maintaining medical support, ready to stop and provide treatment if her condition became critical. Rodriguez coordinated the movement while constantly scanning for threats, knowing that discovery would likely mean death or capture for all 4 team members. Their luck ran out when they encountered an enemy patrol that had been positioned specifically to intercept escaping survivors from the previous day's ambush. The firefight erupted suddenly, with both sides caught in open terrain that offered minimal cover. Sarah, despite her injuries, immediately took a defensive position and provided covering fire while her teammates maneuvered for better tactical positions. The engagement was brief but intense, with superior enemy numbers offset by the SEALs' training and Sarah's detailed knowledge of local terrain from her intelligence work. Chun was wounded during the firefight, taking a bullet in the shoulder that didn't appear life-threatening, but significantly impacted his ability to provide medical support. Sullivan eliminated 2 enemy fighters with precision rifle fire, while Rodriguez coordinated their tactical withdrawal to more defensible positions. Sarah's performance during the firefight impressed her teammates and proved that her injuries, while serious, hadn't compromised her effectiveness as a combat operator. However, the engagement had revealed their position to additional enemy forces and made stealth impossible for the remainder of their movement. With their position compromised and 2 wounded team members, Rodriguez faced the most difficult decision of his military career. Standard operating procedure called for the team to find defensive positions and request immediate extraction, but their communication equipment remained unreliable and enemy forces were converging on their location. The intelligence Sarah carried was time-sensitive and crucial for preventing mass casualties, but attempting to reach their base with wounded personnel would be extremely dangerous. Rodriguez chose to continue the mission, knowing that stopping might doom both his team and the civilians targeted in tomorrow's attack. The next phase of their movement became a running battle as enemy forces attempted to surround and capture the American operators. Sullivan used his marksmanship skills to slow pursuing forces while Chun, despite his wound, continued providing medical support to Sarah during brief rest stops. Rodriguez led the team through terrain he remembered from previous operations, using natural features and abandoned buildings to break contact with pursuers. Sarah contributed her knowledge of local geography and culture, helping the team avoid areas where enemy forces might have established ambushes. As they approached the final kilometers before reaching friendly territory, Sarah's condition began deteriorating rapidly due to the physical stress of combat and movement. Chin's assessment indicated internal bleeding was worsening and that she required immediate surgical intervention to prevent life-threatening complications. Sullivan reported that enemy forces had established roadblocks on major routes, making direct approach to their base impossible. Rodriguez realized they needed to find an alternative way to get Sarah medical attention while still delivering the intelligence she had gathered. The solution came from an unexpected source when Sullivan managed to establish brief communication with a special forces unit operating in their area. Captain David Kim's team had been monitoring radio traffic about missing American personnel and was positioned to provide assistance. Kim immediately agreed to provide medical evacuation for Sarah while ensuring the intelligence reached appropriate commanders. The coordination required precise timing and flawless execution, but it offered their best chance for mission success and team survival. The link-up with Captain Kim's team occurred just as Sarah's condition reached critical status. The Special Forces medic immediately began advanced life support measures while Kim's communication specialist transmitted Sarah's intelligence to their command structure. Rodriguez, Sullivan, and Chun provided security during the medical evacuation, knowing that enemy forces were still pursuing them and might attack at any moment. The next few minutes would determine whether their unauthorized mission ended in success or disaster. Sarah's evacuation to a field hospital occurred under heavy security, with multiple aircraft providing cover during the medical transport. Her survival had been a close thing, with doctors later confirming that she would not have lived through another day without proper medical intervention. The intelligence she had gathered allowed coalition forces to prevent the planned terrorist attack, saving countless civilian lives and disrupting a major enemy operation. Her teammates had risked everything to bring her home, and their actions had ultimately saved far more than just one person's life. The aftermath of the unauthorized rescue mission created significant complications for Rodriguez, Sullivan, and Chun. Colonel Parker faced pressure from higher command to court-martial the 3 SEALs for disobeying direct orders and endangering military operations. However, the success of their mission and the intelligence they had recovered made punishment problematic from both public relations and operational perspectives. The 3 men were ultimately transferred to different units rather than face formal disciplinary action, though their careers were permanently impacted by their decision to violate orders. Sarah's recovery took several months and required multiple surgeries to address complications from her injuries and the delayed medical treatment. During her rehabilitation, she received the Purple Heart and Bronze Star for her actions during the mission that had nearly killed her. More importantly, she maintained contact with the 3 teammates who had saved her life, developing friendships that would last long after their military service ended. The experience had tested all 4 operators in ways that training could never replicate, proving their commitment to the principles that define elite military units. Years later, when Sarah had returned to civilian life and her teammates had completed their military service, they would gather annually to commemorate the mission that had nearly cost them everything. The story of their unauthorized rescue operation became legendary within the special operations community, though official records remained classified. Rodriguez, Sullivan, and Chun had proven that some principles transcend orders and regulations, while Sarah had demonstrated that intelligence officers could be every bit as tough as the SEALs they supported. Together, they had validated the truth that defines elite military units. No one gets left behind, regardless of the cost. The terrorist cell they had been tracking was eventually eliminated through operations that built on the intelligence Sarah had gathered during her isolation. The attack on Kandahar City was prevented, and subsequent raids disrupted the entire network that had been responsible for multiple civilian casualties. Sarah's survival and the intelligence she preserved had strategic impacts that extended far beyond the immediate rescue mission. Her teammates' decision to violate orders had ultimately served both military objectives and the higher principle that every life has value worth the greatest risks. The cave where Sarah had hidden for 2 days became a landmark of sorts for subsequent operations in the region, though few people knew its significance. Local civilians who learned about the events began referring to it as a place where Americans had proven their commitment to protecting each other. The story, though officially classified, became part of local folklore about the strange foreigners who fought with such dedication that they would risk everything for a single teammate. In a region where trust was scarce and alliances shifted quickly, the rescue mission provided a rare example of absolute loyalty that transcended cultural boundaries. The lesson learned from Sarah's rescue became part of training programs for future special operations personnel, though the specific details remained classified. Instructors used the mission to illustrate the complex relationship between following orders and adhering to fundamental principles that define military service. Rodriguez, Sullivan, and Chun had chosen principle over procedure, risking their careers to uphold the commitment that no one gets left behind. Their success had validated that choice, but instructors made sure students understood that similar situations might not always end so favorably. Sarah eventually wrote a classified after-action report that became required reading for intelligence officers working with special operations units. Her analysis of the mission focused not on the unauthorized rescue, but on the intelligence-gathering opportunities that could emerge from seemingly failed operations. She had learned more about enemy capabilities and intentions during her 48 hours in the cave than months of conventional intelligence collection had revealed. Her report emphasized that survival situations, while never desirable, could provide unique insights into enemy operations and local dynamics that were impossible to obtain through normal channels. The bonds forged during that mission in Afghanistan extended far beyond military service for all 4 participants. Rodriguez became Sarah's daughter's godfather, while Sullivan and Chun remained close family friends who gathered regularly for holidays and special occasions. They had shared an experience that few people could understand, facing death together and emerging stronger for the experience. Their story became a private legend within their families, proof that some friendships are forged in circumstances that create unbreakable bonds lasting a lifetime. Violation of orders. Sarah was experiencing her 2nd day alone in the cave. Her condition had stabilized somewhat, but dehydration was becoming a serious concern and her leg wound showed signs of infection despite her efforts to keep it clean. She had heard helicopter activity during the night, but couldn't determine whether it represented friendly forces searching for her or enemy patrols. The uncertainty was almost as difficult to bear as the physical discomfort of her injuries and the primitive conditions in the cave. Sarah had also begun to hear voices and movement in the surrounding area, indicating that someone was conducting searches near her location. She couldn't determine whether these were enemy forces looking for survivors from the ambush or local civilians going about their daily activities. Either way, discovery could mean death or capture, both outcomes she was determined to avoid as long as possible. She prepared her weapon and positioned herself to defend the cave entrance if necessary, knowing that her limited ammunition meant any firefight would be brief and decisive. The psychological pressure of isolation and uncertainty was taking its toll along with the physical effects of her injuries. Sarah found herself thinking about her family, her career, and the choices that had led her to this desperate situation. She had always known that military service carried risks, but the reality of facing death alone in a foreign country felt different from the abstract dangers discussed during training. She drew strength from her training and her commitment to the mission, but also began to understand why survival situations broke some people while others endured. Rodriguez, Sullivan, and Chun left their forward operating base at 0400 hours, using a maintenance tunnel that allowed them to avoid checkpoints and sentries. Their unauthorized departure would be discovered within hours, but by then, they planned to be deep enough into hostile territory that recall would be impossible. Each man carried minimal equipment to maintain mobility, but they had prioritized medical supplies and ammunition based on their assessment of what Sarah might need if they found her alive. The mission represented a calculated gamble with their careers, their lives, and their freedom, but none of them questioned the decision to take that risk. The journey back to the ambush site took longer than their original mission because they were forced to avoid known enemy positions and patrol routes. Intelligence gathered since their escape indicated that hostile forces had reinforced the area, making their task even more dangerous than the original mission. Rodriguez led his team through terrain that offered concealment but was difficult to traverse, balancing the need for stealth against the urgency of reaching Sarah before her condition deteriorated beyond recovery. As they approached the area where Sarah had disappeared, the three SEALs began a systematic search pattern designed to cover the maximum ground while minimizing exposure to enemy observation. They had studied satellite imagery and topographical maps to identify possible hiding places, but the terrain offered numerous caves, overhangs, and rocky formations that could provide shelter. Sullivan used electronic equipment to scan for any signals that might indicate Sarah's location, while Chin prepared medical supplies for immediate treatment if they found her alive. Rodriguez coordinated the search while maintaining watch for enemy activity that could threaten their position. The area showed signs of the previous day's fighting, with bullet impacts on rocks and disturbed ground where the ambush had taken place. More concerning, he observed evidence of systematic searches that indicated enemy forces were also looking for survivors. The race to find Sarah had become a competition between her teammates and hostile forces who understood her intelligence value if captured alive. The breakthrough came when Sullivan detected a faint signal from Sarah's emergency beacon, a backup device that had been damaged but was still transmitting intermittently. The signal led them to a rocky area approximately 300 meters from the original ambush site, where Chin spotted the cave entrance that had provided Sarah's shelter. Rodriguez approached carefully, using hand signals to announce their presence in case Sarah was conscious and armed. The response he received would determine whether their unauthorized mission had been worth the enormous risks they had taken. Shelter. Sarah began to understand the true meaning of the phrase that every Navy SEAL learns from their first day of training. The only easy day was yesterday. She had no way of knowing that 15 kilometers away, her teammates were already planning a rescue operation that would violate direct orders and risk court-martial. Because to them, the fundamental truth remained unchanged. Navy SEALs always come back for their own.